was probably 4 years old, which would make Jacob 7 years old. Tamara Packer was with us. Gary's longtime friend, Eldon Nettle, and many of you know Eldon. He was always with Gary, helping no matter what, but he was a huge help with the horses and setting up camp. So I'm going to give you a little scenario about what it was like for Gary. This is the cabin in which Gary lived the first few years of his life. And I will never forget the excitement when we pulled into Chalice. You know, that's where Gary grew up. I could feel this anxiousness, this energy, this excitement. And he became very quiet. He didn't say anything. We drove down the road, it's kind of a back road, towards the cabin. And when we pulled up, and of course I was seeing this for the first time, so I didn't know, Gary jumped out of the truck and ran to the fence and turned around and went, "Mary, come." He just stood there and he just looked, and he was so deep in thought. It was really overwhelming to me, kind of hard to describe, because he was reliving his whole life looking at this old cabin. It was at the base of the mountain. It's the mountain that he felt he owned. Gary and his father cleared the trails every year for the Forest Service and helped string the wires from Chalice to the outlook point at the very top of the mountain. They called it Outlook Mountain. One time we drove up there, it was a horrible road, it was hard to get up there, it was narrow and windy, and it was just out there in the middle of nowhere. But all through the mountain we could see wires on the ground. And he said, "Mary, those are the wires that Dad and I strung." The Forest Service had contracted Gary's father to string the wire from Chalice to the Lookout Mountain. And of course, Gary did everything with his father. Well, the Forest Service was nice enough, and they allowed Gary's father to string a line into their home, so they would have a modern way of communication. Now, the old rotary telephone I found in the old house at St. Mary's before I bulldozed it down was that old rotary phone that was in the old cabin. And when you go to Young Living Headquarters, when you go and visit the cabin, as soon as you walk in the door, on the wall to your right is the old rotary phone, the original rotary phone. So when you see it, this is the original phone. Gary drew the plans for the cabin before he left us, gave it to the architect. His sister Nancy came down and said, "Yes, this is just exactly how it was." So when you see this old cabin, you'll have a little bit of history to go along with it. When the family lived in the cabin, they saddled their horses outside the barn and rode into Warm Springs for the family vacation that they had once a year. However, as Gary grew as a teenager, he would tell me all kinds of stories about riding to Warm Springs. There's hot water there that falls 1,000 feet from the top. And that water is so hot it can burn you. And it's just fabulous. So Gary always wanted to go to the hot springs, and he told me all kinds of stories. And I believe that Warm Spring was the happiest time of Gary's life, because he was there, as far as he was concerned, He was there with God in God's mountain. And he had his fingers in the earth. He was riding his horse. He was just one with Mother Nature, and he loved it. Well, when he took me to Warm Springs for the first time, here's the fence where we stopped. It wasn't on horses that we went up the mountain. It was a very dramatic difference. And Gary did not have a one-ton dually and a trailer to take him up the mountains. Just the horses. This is what the road looked like. Now this is at the bottom, just beyond the cabin, after you go into the mountains. Relatively clear here, but the further up you went, we had to jump out of the truck and throw rocks and branches and everything to make clear so the truck could pass. Right here, can you see the right wheel up on the side? It wasn't wide enough, it was too close to the edge, and that was about 1,000-foot drop down the mountain. And it was scarier than heck. And I would always get the boys and get out of the truck and walk across because it was too scary riding with Gary. He'd go up on the side of the hill, and we'd all be tipping, and he'd just be laughing at how scared we all were, and we all thought we were funny. But I tell you, it was scary. Here's the road. You can see some of the rocks. Now I'm gonna combine two stories together. Here the boys are a little bit older. This is many times. We went almost every summer. But you can see the narrowness of the road. Look at that. Oh. Now we get to the top of the mountain. It's about a 4 to 5 hour drive up to the top. That's about 11,000 feet. We would park the trailers, take the horses out, and here you can see he would start to pack them, and he would ride them around a little bit so they could get used to the balance, and he could make sure everything was okay, and then he'd finish putting the rest of the packs on. He loved to pack. The more pack horses, the happier he was. And you can see here we're just about ready to leave, to start down the mountain. Now this is the road coming out. This is when he took them out to see how they would do. It should have been an earlier slide. Anyway, here we are, ready to go. You see Jacob? There in the front. He always had Jacob in the front with him. And after Joseph was born, he made a seat for Jacob in the back, and had Joseph in the front. He had both boys on the horse with him, and he was so happy. I'm setting this up so you get the idea of what it was like for Gary. This is part of the trail. And the mountain, we're up here on the top, and we're going down here, all the way down here. It was a 4 to 5 hour truck ride up the mountain and about an hour and a half down the mountain to camp. We came to the spot. Can you even see a trail there? The first time we came to that, and I wasn't used to horses, and I was scared to death. And I'm holding my breath, and I had the horse stopped, and he said, "Come on, Mary, come on." And I said, "Gary, I can't do this, I can't." He said, "Yes, you can. The horse knows what to do." "Yeah, that's what you say, but I don't know that the horse knows that." So finally, I just closed my eyes and put my hands on the horn of the saddle, and I just waited. And the horse just followed the horse in front of it. He said, "The horse isn't going to step off. The horse has 4 legs. It knows what it's doing. It knows how to get across." I tell you, for all the years that we did this, I never changed how I felt. And I would hold onto the horn and just close my eyes and let the horse go. And we always made it across. It was most remarkable. Here we are in camp. Gary's building me my kitchen. With Gary, when you went to the mountains, it was like Gary's Taj Mahal. Everything had to be beautiful, perfect, wonderful. Here's my kitchen. There's Tammy in the green coat. There's Joseph. You can see Gary partially. It was fabulous. You look at all the ladles and everything had to be in place. Everything had to be in order. You didn't leave anything on the ground in Gary's camp. It had to be just as neat as his laboratory. How neat. All the pack saddles on. Everything right in place. Even the shacks had to be hanging up. First thing he had to do was go fishing. He actually didn't take his horse fishing because he liked to walk the water. But he'd go downstream, upstream, and he'd have the boys trailing around behind him, and he just loved it. And when we were in camp, Gary did all the cooking. Man, was I lucky. But Gary was a fabulous cook. And to have him cook was just a dream. And he had all his spices and everything. And we'd freeze the eggs and he'd put them in containers and we'd thaw them out and he'd make it like a deep, not really frozen, but a refrigerator down in the water in the creek. Yeah, he was so smart. He knew how to do everything. Joseph was being smart and sat down in the bucket and couldn't get out. I love this picture. We had to get him out, but as you can see, he's not a happy camper. There's our tent. Look how clever he was. One tent over the other one, just to make sure no rain got in. But it was cool. It's like kind of mountain air conditioning. See, everything hung up. Everything in its place. This is what he loved to do. This is Jacob. You always know it's Jacob because he has a big key in his mouth. This was Jacob and Gary from the day Jacob was born. I think that's why he's so connected to Gary. Everything was Dad. Everything was Dad. And Gary loved to sleep in the mountain. When he had everything cleaned up, he'd go into the tent, he'd lie down, and there was Jacob. The two of them fast asleep. See the clothes hanging up on the line? Many times. And right there where you can see the horses, that's where the water is. And I'd take a bucket of clothes with my soap and my brush, and I'd go and I'd sit down on a nice flat rock, and I'd pull the clothes out, and I'd put some soap on them, and I'd scrub and clean them up, and then I'd go hang. That was a lot of work. I really wished I had my washer and dryer then. But it was all part of being in the mountains. Now, right on the other side, just behind where you can see that horse, is a place where the hot water had come down from the mountains. And so we'd dig it out and we'd make ourselves a hot tub. And we'd go in the hot tub every night. It was fabulous. Well, this is what we would be looking at from the hot tub. After we had our camp all set up after working most of the day and everything was perfect and in its place, we decided we're going to go up and get in the hot tub. And Tammy was the first one up there, and she's looking out. She says, "Isn't that a beautiful sunset?" Eldon came walking up, and I was behind Eldon, and the boys were behind me. And Eldon came up, and he looked, and he said, "Gary, you better come over and look at this." Gary came over, and I still see him like this. I think we better start praying. Because what Tammy thought was a sunset was the fire on the mountain that would probably reach us in 3 or 4 hours. Gary had fought many fires in Canada. He'd been a fire boss several times. He bulldozed trails through fires, making firewalls. He knew fire, and he knew how fast it traveled. And there was a lot of conversation about, do you think it will come here? Do you think we could get in the water and go up to the falls? We could escape it till it went over us. We don't know anything. And Gary said, aren't you guys funny? He said, smoke would fill up in that canyon so fast there'd be no air. We'd be dead within 30 minutes. And he watched it, he walked back and forth, and he said, Mary, I think you and Tammy better pack up. We better get out of here while we can. So Tammy and I started packing, and Gary said, Elda and I will go get the horses. This is like at 6 o'clock in the evening, and it was light until about 10 o'clock. Well, the horses smelled the fire, and you know what horses do? They run. Gary's horse Sundance was the pack leader, and so Gary didn't hobble them because Sundance always stayed close to Gary. He never took off, and Gary never had to worry if Sundance was there. But the instinct of the wild animal is to run from the fire. So when he went looking for the horses, he couldn't find them. Well, can you imagine the panic that we all felt? And as Gary and Eldon took off on foot, he said, Mary, when we get back, we may have to leave everything. Leave everything? It's all going to burn up. I said, we don't have a choice. We got to get out of here. We got to get out of here fast. It's about an hour up the trail, and if we didn't have the horses, it would take us probably 2.5 to 3 hours to get to the top to the trucks. So we moved, Tammy and I moved fast. It got dark. Gary and Eldon didn't come back. We pulled those big tents down. We pulled out the stakes. We did everything, Tammy and I. Jacob helped a little bit, but Jacob was only like about 10. But it was fascinating because we all said a prayer, all asking God to stop the fire, to keep it away until we were able to get out. It was really interesting with Jacob. It was about midnight, and Gary and Eldon hadn't come back. And all we had were lanterns to pack with. And we had Joseph wrapped up in a blanket on a tarp on the ground because we had to let the air mattress out to pack him. And Jacob was sitting on a chair away from us, and he was chanting. You know what? I think I ought to have Jacob come up and tell you how he experienced this. It's quite fascinating through the eyes of a 10-year-old. Can you remember it very well, Jacob?
It's like it was yesterday.
Really?
Yep.
Tell them what you experienced, what you thought.
Well, I first want to share that story with the horses. It was even funnier because before Tammy spotted the fire, she looked on the other ridge across where the fire was and said, I think there's some wild goats up there.
That's right.
Those weren't the goats. Those were the horses that had...
There was a white one.
Yeah, there was a white one.
And so we thought it was a goat or a sheep.
Yep.
And it wasn't. It was our white horse that had already gone. Dad was mad.
Yeah, he was really mad at Sundance. When that fire had come, and Dad was getting ready to leave, as Mom said, I was always very close to my dad, and I did not want Dad to leave. And I said, Dad, how can I help? I want to go with you. And he said, son, I need you to stay here. And I said, well, what can I do here? I want to go help you. And he said, you can help me by starting to pray. So I sat in my chair, our little Spider-Man chair that we still have, and I began praying. I began chanting, let the fire go away, keep us safe, safe God, please keep us safe. And I chanted and I prayed all night long till we woke up, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning when the
We
sun was coming
didn't
over.
wake up. We were awake.
Well, yeah.
We
I
did.
fell asleep, but
Yes, you and Joseph. But I believe Jacob probably chanted for 5 hours, non-stop. Tammy and I would look over, and Jacob still chanting, still praying out loud, and we could hear him. It was remarkable. But Gary and Eldon came in, and he said he found the horses in a bush of trees, hiding. They weren't moving, they weren't making any sound. And I asked him, I said, how did you know they were there? And he said, I could smell them. I was talking to them, I was asking them to let me know where they were. And he said, I looked over and I knew they were in the trees. Went over and got them, brought them down. And what had happened to the fire?
the wind was blowing in the direction heading straight towards camp. And what was amazing is that we were in this little valley and the whole mountain had surrounded us from left to right. And the only escape was out of the valley and back up through the trail that we come down through. And with the way that the wind was blowing, it should have come straight over the hill and down the camp and burned everything.
And us with it.
And the fire had gone in opposite directions. It had burned left and it had burned right and it had burned around us. And when we got out of camp and the Forest Service released photos, it had burned right in the center after we had left.
What we saw, the last memory I have is looking up, and all we could see was the smoldering, like the fire had burned out that part that was coming right to us. It was truly a miracle. The Forest Service said they had never seen anything like that, ever. Because everything was blowing towards us, except that spot.
And you remember when they met us at the top of the trail when we got out, right? Asking us how we were alive and how we got out.
Well, you may be mixing the story. I don't know. But I'm getting there. So you can see, I wanted to tell you about this before we leave the mountains. Does anybody know what this is? Can you guess what this is? It's an ancient medicine wheel.
Also known as the spirit compass.
The spirit compass at the very, very top of the mountain above the hot springs, where they fell 1,000 feet. And every time we went to Warm Springs, Gary would take us up there, and he loved to sleep inside the medicine wheel. That's my hat on his face, and I was taking the pictures. But notice Jacob. Notice Joseph. There was something really special about this. And there's Jacob off by himself. There was a connection. How did a little boy come to this? It was a connection that they made to Mother Earth, that they made to the ancient way of the medicine wheel, I could say. They just connected to what was up there. It was really special, wasn't it? You
Very.
remember?
I remember.
I had to show you this. Look at that face.
Can I share a really quick story about this? So you see that biggest fish on the right there?
The what?
The biggest fish on the right?
Yeah.
Joseph caught that fish. Do you remember how he caught that?
Oh, they tell me no, I don't remember.
So we were fishing, and Joseph's line had gotten
Tangled?
tangled up. And And so the spot that we were in, there was like a pull down below us, about 3 feet up from the bank. And Joseph had pulled his line out of the water, and Dad reached out to try and grab it. And Joseph, I caught every other fish right there. And Joseph was just feeling so bad.
Yeah,
He was the
really
worst
depressed.
fisherman
He
ever.
he hadn't caught a fish.
He
That's
went
right.
down the stream a mile, up the stream a mile, went on each side of the stream just to try and catch a fish. And while that line was 3 feet out of the air, that big brown trout jumped up and grabbed onto his line. And that's how Joseph caught that fish. And he rubbed it in my face saying, I didn't even have to put my lure in the water. All I did was stick it out there and they grabbed on and now I got the biggest fish. And he still teases me about it to this day.
Just because he's doing.
Oh, yeah.
That's funny. Now, when we got down the mountain, and we looked back, this is what we saw. I remember looking at Gary, he almost cried to see his mountain on fire. His mountain, where he grew up, where he went and talked to God, where he found who he was. It was horrible for him to see this. When we went back the next year, everything was black. The trees, just a little bit left of black. And he cried. He wanted to take in trees and do a reforestation project, and I went, oh, Gary, who are you kidding? Come on. But that's what was in his mind. Here, this is after the fire. It was terrible. There was no place for the animals to go to hide. Now, I should come back to this. No. See, I'm going to put two stories together. So just follow with me. About 3 years later, we're back in Warm Springs, and there was always the worry of fire in the mountains. And this is in the Idaho wilderness, the Frank Church wilderness area. And Gary loved it because we left our cell phones and everything in the car. There was no communication to the outside, and he was in heaven. Well, the fires were burning at the bottom of the mountain this time. The Forest Service came in a chopper, and they had to walk down into the little valley where we were next to the creek, or a big creek or a small river, and they told us that the fire was burning, and that if we didn't leave right now, we might be stuck in the canyon for a few days. So he decided that we were going to stay. We were going to battle the fire. And the Forest Service warned him and said, you could be stuck here for a while, but Gary was willing to take his chances. They came back a second time, about 3 days later, and said, you can't get out at the bottom, but you need to get out of the valley. You need to go up on top, so when it opens up, you can get out, and you have self-service with us because we have satellite phones. And so this is where we are, sitting around the camp. You can see how the horses are strung up, and we're waiting for the Forest Service to tell us we can get out. We waited. Gary called them 2 or 3 times, and they didn't answer. They had told us that the bridge at the bottom had been burned out, that there was no way we could get across the river. So Gary's thinking, okay, so we're going to have to take the horses out of the trailer and walk them around, and this is going to be a nightmare, and what are we going to do? He started thinking, I wonder. So he said, come on, Mary, let's go find out what's going on. We went down there all the way and found out the bridge was not burned out, we were misinformed. We could see the fire had burned on both sides, but it was not burning over the road. You can see the logs have been moved out of the way, and I drove the truck, and he hooked chains up, straps, then he hopped back in and we pulled logs out of the road so we could get through. You can see that trailer's not hooked up, but we pulled everything out of the way. We had another 2-hour drive up the mountain to where the camp was, packed everything up, and Gary looked at me and I looked at him and he said, "Let's go." We didn't have permission to leave the mountain. The Forest Service didn't answer his cell phone. And he'd already seen that the bridge was there. So he said, "All right, let's make sure that all the windows are closed so the horses aren't breathing the smoke." This is what we drove through. You can see the road right there in front. You can see the fire burning. I took these pictures. We drove right past the burning trees. You can see the smoke. And we had masks, bandanas over our noses. We had water. We were putting water in the trailer for the horses. We drove right through this, but there was no fire. We got to the bridge, drove over the bridge, and we drove out. And the Forest Service people on the other side were in shock when they saw us. And they were mad.
Very mad.
Because they hadn't given Gary permission. But we had gold retreat in St. Mary's. We had to get out. We had to be in St. Mary's. But Gary didn't want to give up the mountain. So we set up tent in another place, and here he is with Joseph, doing the same thing. But we had heard that there was an old mining camp up there in the mountains, so we decided to go exploring. A deserted mining camp. Look at this. There's Joseph sitting on the steps. See, inside the refinery. Do you remember that?
Yeah, well, I'm right there.
Oh, that's you. Wasn't that interesting though?
Everything was left.
Everything was left, yeah, they just walked away from it.
Yep.
And there's Joseph. What do you think about that old truck? Gary said, "Mary, I want to take this back to Mona." I said, "What?"
No, he was serious. He actually tried to haul a trailer up there to get this loaded on and wanted to
He thought
fix
he
it.
was going
He thought
to.
he could fix it.
Look at this old dozer. He wanted it because it was so old, he wanted to display it. I said, "Gary, you're looking at tonnage. Let's be real." And that was one time my rationale succeeded. Here I am with Tammy. All of those old cabins, everything was abandoned. There wasn't a soul around. And here we are, after having come out of the mountains. Okay, honey. Okay, where are we? Hey, you can stay up here with me, or you can go sit down.
You need me?
I don't know what I'm gonna say.
I'll be right there.
Okay. At the risk of being too dramatic, I'd like to make a comparison. I want to give you something to think about. Did we believe that the fire would come over the mountain and we would have been able to escape? Well, obviously that went through our mind. Should we wait it out and see what happens? Or should we pack up and go while there seemed to be time to get out? What would you have done? Just finished setting up the camp. It looked like we were going to have a great time. But you know what? We couldn't change the outside circumstances. We were not in control. Gary made the decision. Gary had a knowing. Gary could see it coming. He knew we had to leave. He knew we didn't have much time. He knew there was only one way to stop the fire. He knew there was only one way we were going to get out alive. With Joseph asleep on the ground, Jacob sitting on the blanket chanting, Gary and Eldon finally coming back, loading the horses up, getting out. We made the top of the mountain just as the sun was coming up. We held that fire off, not we. Our belief, our trust. Gary's knowing. Gary always had a knowing. He just didn't know how long we could stay the fire. What would have happened if we had not left the mountain? We lost our time in the mountains. We lost the time that Gary loved so much. I spent all this time telling you because I want you to realize the mountains were everything to Gary. For him to leave his mountain, the mountain where he grew up, the mountain where he rode with the wild horses in the middle of the night, bareback on his horse Cannonball. Mountains where he was free and independent. It was so painful for him. But our lives were spared, and Mother Nature would begin to rebuild her forest. Again, we cannot bemoan our losses over this past year. We can complain about all the things that have gone wrong and how difficult it's been and how the changes in the world have focused us into changes that we don't want to embrace. But I suggest we look at it a different way. If we had not left the mountain, there would be no Young Living and you would not be sitting here today. That is a fact. I'm sure Gary knew that. He knew a lot more than I knew in those days. As I said, he had a knowing. Do you have a knowing about how important the oils are to you? Do you have a knowing about your supplements? Do you have a knowing about what Young Living means to your family? Why are you here today? Do we want Young Living to continue to grow and be a healthy company? Do you want to go without your favorite oil? For me, the most important thing is that I'm able to get my oils. I would never want to be without Helichrysum, or frankincense, or Gary's Light, and especially now, Evergreen Essence. What about Ninja Red, Agility, Super C, Vitamin D? There's just a few. Just a few. Can we go without a little bit in order to maintain the whole? Can you? Can you? I'm asking you to see the big picture. and help those of us in the office who are working so carefully and thoughtfully to make the best decisions possible for the well-being of all of us, you and me, you in the field and Young Living. We are not in danger if we make adjustments to combat all the challenges, things we have to deal with, the ever-rising costs in supply chain, consumer goods, and the massive needs in running such a big company. Harry always said, look for the outcome that you want and then be part of the solution, bringing that outcome to fruition. Let's think about all the things for which we are grateful. I don't know if Andrew mentioned specifics about costs. Do you know that a 40-foot container used to cost about $2,500 to ship? Today it costs between $17,000 and $25,000. Can you imagine that kind of a jump? You all see the prices in shipping? FedEx, DHL, UPS, the prices have gone up dramatically. I just paid $9 shipping for something that I wanted on Amazon. $9 shipping, this is insanity. But I need this product, I wanted this particular thing. So I paid it. I don't pay it, I don't get it. We don't pay the prices, we won't have what we need. We're bringing oils from all over the world. What do you think we're paying to bring those oils in? How long do you think Young Living could survive if we don't have any profit and we're operating in the hole? We're operating at a loss. Can any business survive that? Can it? Come on. No business can survive that. Why have so many businesses gone out of business? Because they can't operate at a loss. I'm telling you, we have to make changes. We have to make little changes. Maybe we have to raise the price a little bit. Maybe we have to raise shipping. We are going to have to raise the price of shipping. Things are going to happen. You don't have to. I am asking you to share with us in the costs that are going up in order for us to have that which we love so much, that which is so important to us in our lives. It's critical that you know that we are doing everything in our power to cut costs so that you don't have to bear very much of that cost. When we have retreats, do you want to have swag that maybe costs $100, $50, or can you bring your own? You want to have bottles of ginger red on the table that you drink freely? That might cost $200,000 to $300,000 to ship? Put on that table? You want to bring your own? I'm being very real. I'm calling a spade a spade. Lots of people don't like to talk about money, but this world operates on money. There's no way around it. If you don't pay your bills, they'll take back your car. They'll take back your new washer and dryer. They'll even foreclose on you and kick you out of your house. That makes me really sad. I do not like to see anybody suffer. I do not like to see anybody be the victim. And I will help wherever I can. But if you can see a way to help, then help. We don't need 5 boxes of pencils, maybe we only need 1. You don't need 20 tape dispensers. Maybe we just need 2. We didn't need a whole storage room full of paper. What are all the institutions out there doing to us? They're giving you rewards, they're paying you to go paperless. Why? Because it costs money. They don't want to go in the hole, they're going to pass it on to us. We have to do the same thing. We are looking for ways. We are doing everything we can. There's a tremendous analysis, budgeting going on in Young Living right now to look at all the different ways to move product, to move things that have been sitting for a long time, to not buy what we need. If you see that you can help, and I'm asking you to help, it's not your place, it's not your responsibility to cut costs at Young Living. It's my responsibility. Our responsibility in the office. And I can tell you, they are doing a magnificent job. Maybe you don't have 4 choices of shampoo. Maybe there's only going to be 2. Can you live with that? As long as you have 2? The question came to me, well, Mary, what do you think about mint shampoo? I said, cut it. If they want mint shampoo, they can put a couple of drops of peppermint in their shampoo and shake it up. Can you do that? Can you? So don't get upset when you see these kinds of things start to happen. Because we're going to look at all the different ways within our product line that we can cut down, that we can streamline it. You don't need 5 variations. I would be happy just to have bath gel, put my own oils in it. I don't need to have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I happen to love Sensation. I happen to love Peace and Calming. Morning Star was the first one that Gary created. How many do we need?